Lisa De Angelis grew up in Sydney and now lives in Brisbane, where she makes cowboy music for city slickers. A captivating live performer, she has toured with artists such as Amber Lawrence, Catherine Britt, and Melody Moko, played the Tamworth Country Music Festival and the Gympie Music Muster. She has a new single called Wildwood, Time to Grow Up. So we're going to talk about that and about her stunning live performances because I have questions. Hello, Lisa.
Hello. Thanks so much for having me, Sophie.
It's very lovely to see you again because I so enjoyed our first interview, which was a while ago now. So I'm going to launch straight into the new single, Wildwood. What is the story behind it?
So, I've actually been sitting on Wildwood for a couple of years, for a little while. Basically, the story was that I was in a long distance relationship. No one's actually asked me directly what the story is yet, strangely, for this song. So here we go. Sunburnt Country scoop. um, I was in a long distance relationship when I was a little younger, and that you've got all these complications of it being like long distance, and we were in different countries, so it's like really long distance. But I think the main thing that relationship taught me was that sometimes it's okay to just be like, this doesn't get better, it's not going to get any better, and just move on. Like, I think a lot of the time, most people, I would say, I was going to say everyone, but not to make a sweeping generalization, I think a lot of people have at least a relationship that they can think back on, that they're like, you held on through it, even though it wasn't that good, just because you'd sort of seen the potential for like that person in the relationship and what it could be. And if only we could just like get over that hurdle that makes you not a very good partner to me, and like maybe not treat me very well, or it's, not as easy as it should be. And basically, you hold on for dear life, just hoping that they'll come round. And then eventually I just kind of gradually, it wasn't a waking up one morning, but I gradually just went, oh my goodness, this is the best that he can do. And it's actually not good enough for me, like this is the best. It doesn't get better than this. He emotionally, mentally cannot provide anything more than this. And so I just have to grow up, I guess, from this situation, take the knocks, take the loss, and, get on with it, basically. And when I thought back about it, that relationship, when I was getting through the songwriting process of, grieving things that went wrong and whatever else, and, writing it out in different songs and exploring that sort of thing, I realized I could see these really distinct seasons that we had gone through that almost matched the seasons of the year that it had happened. Like, you meet and it's incredible. You feel so, it's like a warm summer day, everything's really like hot and exciting and amazing. And, the seasons of it cooling off and getting a little bit lonelier. And then finally the new beginning of a nostalgic spring at the end. That was a long-winded answer, but that's the answer.
It's a great answer. And I love the idea of a nostalgic spring because it's that,
Yes.
by calling it that, it's like, it's not actually that we're warming up to what we had.
No, it's actually the spring. I realized that the spring was not like the good season. It was the good season, not the good season in our relationship. It was the good season at the end of the cycle where I was like, actually, this is better if we just go our separate ways,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and it is really hard to let go of the sunk cost fallacy, which is that idea that I've put all this time and effort in, and so I'm going to cling on because something may come of it. And when you've spent time, in particular, I think, quite apart from energy and giving emotion to someone and all those sorts of things, it's like, well, I can't get that time back. Something has to come of it. So I think it is a very common experience.
Yes, I think so too. I mean, the specifics of, say, like long distance, whatever else, those are all the details, but I think the overarching theme of being like, I really want this, and I think that we could really make it work, and then recognizing that there's a degree of maturity in being able to be like, okay, actually, I think that's a pretty universal experience.
Yeah, and I also find it really interesting that you have labeled it as time to grow up, that it wasn't just, oh, mistake, move on. It's actually, well, this was a maturing of me and perhaps a necessary one.
Yes. And I think probably a maturing of him as well, Like, I think a lot of the time you move on from something that's not good and you're just annoyed, or, and then the more the time passes, you think about how the other person, where they were at as well. And I actually remember him saying at one point, like, maybe you think that, like, by other people's standards, this isn't enough, but for me, this is really good. And so, like, you should be really happy with that. And I was like, oh, but I'm not though, like, I don't, if other people can do it better, maybe we should be like not doing this anymore, So it really was like I'm sure that relationship, I mean, who knows, maybe he's just like forgotten all about it. But I think for both of us, there was definitely an amount of being like, let's just like mature and move on from this,
And full credit to you for not continuing to buy into the myth that of the potential, and also that idea that, I should wait and see what happens, and this is true love in inverted commas, because there is a lot of that around in the culture.
For sure. And I think there's really something in that, especially if you're a bit of a romantic person, a bit of an adventurer. I've done like a lot of solo travel, and I'm quite a romantic person, and I think it's so easy to get swept up in the excitement as well, the glamour of your situation, especially when it's something long distance. It's meant to be, it's incredible. And with the distance, you can also overlook a lot of things because you're really just getting snapshots, right? You're not getting who they are all the time, 24 hours in the day. You get like a bit of a highlight reel. And then so that realization of actually being there and being like, oh, this doesn't work. It's,
yeah,
it's a bummer.
Like, fail. Yes.
No, yeah, it's you sort of hang around for a while, being like, you can do it, you can make it work, you can sort this out, and then eventually you just have to be like, it's
no.
It's not good. Let's just go home.
But there is a devastating couple of lines. Well, there are a devastating couple of lines in there in the chorus about I waited a whole year to see if you found a place in your heart for me. Mm-hmm. And it's like, the impact of that idea that you're asking for something quite tenderly. Really, you're asking for him to find a place in his heart, and it hasn't happened. So that's that must also hurt as much as it's a maturing. It must hurt.
Well, I think there's actually some real vulnerability in that, isn't there? I think that when you're writing things, for me anyway, a lot of the time, I don't really know what I'm writing about until it's done. You just sort of, and then look back on it afterwards and go, oh, and a lot of the time, the lines that I think are just throwaway nothing lines that I really didn't think about, that I just sort of plucked from the sky, I guess end up being the most inspired lines, the ones that people relate to the most. It's interesting. I didn't really think that was an especially profound line, but it's the line from the song that most people mention, actually. And yeah, I guess I really felt like I gave a lot in that relationship. And sometimes you're the problem and sometimes you're not the problem. And in that one, unequivocally, I was not, like I knew that I can think of other relationships where I've been the bad guy, like 100%, where I should, send out some apology emails. Like, sometimes you're just not there to be, you're not ready to be the good person in the relationship. But in that instance, I just was like, I was sweet and naive and young and like just doing my absolute best and really committed to and he just couldn't meet me. So
yeah, and if the gentleman did not have a place in his heart for you, he should have respectfully let you go a lot earlier.
Well, that's right. I think he thought that he did. And, I guess there's some maturing in that as well, isn't there? Being like, okay, you think this is good, but I think it's not good enough for me. So yeah.
Now, you tried a few different producers before arriving at this version. What didn't work about their versions?
The thing, honestly, was that every version worked, which was why it was really hard. There was no one that I was like, this is not it. You are not getting it. The problem was that everyone, I think the natural inclination was to make the song sad, to make the production sad, to match the overall tone of the song. And in terms of what the message of the song is, and also the way I heard it when I wrote it, it was just not what I had in mind. I wrote it, when I first wrote it, I envisioned it almost as like a, county fair in the 1930s, maybe like a barbershop thing almost. Like I had heard it as really like, upbeat and, like a bit jaunty, and I just couldn't seem to impress to anyone enough that I didn't want it to be a sad one, you know?
Yeah.
I want it to be hopeful. I want you to want to dance. It's a barn dance song, not a, you know, not a breakup song.
Yeah, because
So
it's like a rite of passage song.
yes, totally, totally. And yeah, you know, people, you want to hope out of that, right? So we still have we have a sad version that, I mean, I may unleash upon the world at some point. But no, this was the version that I always heard in my head. And Paul, my partner, and I co-produced it. So we had 100%, you know, like 360 on what we were doing with it, where it was going. And Paul got it right away, thankfully. So between the two of us, it was, yeah, really easy process.
Because you also worked together on My Sister's Blue Suitcase, which was a previous single. So I'm guessing now that this is the way you will record your music as a producer, because as you said, this is the version that it sounded like in your head, and clearly you are able to execute that with him if you do that.
Yeah.
So there's less reason to go to someone else to do it.
Totally. Yeah. We both My Sister's Blue Suitcase, I've always been super hands-on with anyone I've worked with. I had a previous EP before this one, like years and years before this one, that ended up getting shelved, that I never got to do anything with, from the studio that I'd recorded with. And so I've had a really long time working behind the scenes, even if not like with any outward output, without any output that anyone's been able to see. I've had a really long time figuring out what the process is for me, I guess, behind the scenes. And I've always been super hands-on. You know, I want to be there in the mixing. I'm there when everybody records. I find in country music, it was really surprising to me when I first came into country that a lot of the time you just send the producer your song and the producer works on it without you, and then you just kind of come back in. And I guess that happens a lot of the time, but it was never how I had worked. And so from the get-go, I was like, but I need to be there, you know? And then so over the last two songs, it became really clear that it's more of a cohesive, like a two-way street relationship as far as producing, rather than just a bit of input, you know. And it's good having the two of us as well, because we're both on the same page. So I trust that if I couldn't be at something, which hasn't happened yet, but I trust that if I couldn't be at a session, that Paul would have it covered.
Right.
And there's been a couple of times actually recording the guitar and banjo and mandolin and everything with Michael Moko, where Paul was on tour and couldn't come. And so I just did that session on my own and felt like, okay, yeah, look, I've got it. You know, like, it takes a while to build up the confidence to think that you can go in and do it on your own. But yeah, it's been really gratifying.
And apart from Michael Moko, you have Gabi Louise from the Wicker Suite on violin. You have Melody Moko on backing vocals, Sonic Edwards on bass, and then Paul does the drums. So that's quite a star lineup.
I know, isn't it? I think I got very lucky. There's something very humbling about recording anything and like being aware that you're the least capable. Like,
I dispute that. But go on.
Like, you know, I mean, I met Gabi. We were at the academy together, actually, and she is just so sweet and so talented, and we really clicked, and she just blew me away. And she has a really you know, a real like country fiddle sort of way of playing, that real bluegrass sound that I really love. So no brainer from the get-go that I always wanted Gabi on it. And when we sent her the brief for this, we were like, just go nuts on it. Like, normally where they tell you not to play, you know, we just want licks everywhere. Like, you know. And then yeah, the Sonic Edwards, who's Sonic and Paul are like the rhythm section that have been playing together for ages. Right. So they're like really plugged into each other's brains. Sonic is such a pro. He just I think every time he's done the bass for the last few songs, and I think all of them, it's just been like, I don't even play him a reference. I just say like, I was thinking this song, like maybe like, you know, what do you think about this? For this, I just told him I wanted to be like an upbeat sort of barn dancey, like county fair in Alabama, you know, like, what do you have? And he was like, oh yeah, I got it, you know. So having, it's just been like a Yeah, I got very lucky to be able to draw on all these incredibly, talented friends.
Well, I'm sure they only do it if they want to. Let's put it that way. So,
Well,
it's-
yeah, they've all been lovely and super gracious as well. It's really exciting.
now I've seen you perform live, and it is a whole show. It's not a gig. It's not like you just get up and you're like, "Hi, here are my songs." You tell stories and you create an experience for the
Oh,
audience.
thank
I'm
you.
wondering if you've always performed like that.
Yes. And I mean, look, you get better at it. You get better at it as you go. Um, but yes, that's more or less always been that's been quite deliberate actually, because that's what I like to see. Um, and also, uh, so a couple of things. Sorry, all my thoughts are just trying to like get out of my mouth at the same time as then. First of all, I was a tour guide for about 5 years. So I was a tips only walking tour guide, which basically means they like, drop you in a city. I mean, not a random city, it's one that you're briefed on, but they basically let you out in the city with anywhere between, say, 15 and 50 people. And it's 3 hours, there's no notes, there's no guidebook, it's just rote memory, and you don't earn an income except what people tip you. So you have to get really good at being at, first of all, trimming the fat, being like, okay, that doesn't land, it doesn't work, we just like forget it. And being able to be engaging about what, especially for some people, I'm a big history nerd, but for a lot of people it can be really dry, right? So you have to be able to be like, people are having an enjoyable enough time that they're prepared to pay you what they think the experience was worth for them, and whether or not you pay your rent basically directly corresponds to that. And I loved that job. I'm somebody who thrives on a little bit of flying by the seat of my pants, and I didn't have a script. Every time I did that, every day that I did that tour, it was just, I know the information and we'll just work with pulling whatever's around, like weave something out of the tapestry of this day. And, and I try to bring that into shows as well. I think also it's a lot easier after having done that for so many years to go on stage, because I don't know if this sounds like a really arrogant thing to say, but I have absolute faith in myself that no matter what happens on stage, that I can pull it back and that we'll have a good time, right? Like nothing will ever be more terrifying or could go more badly wrong than, if you're in a group of 50 people and you have, you're walking the tightrope of having to deliver information by memory, and you might have a blackout of, so being on stage feels super natural now. And the other thing, I guess, is also that I saw Jewel at the Sydney Opera House years ago. My sister's a huge Jewel fan. I was sort of just like a casual fan. But she did this show that was just her and a guitar at the Opera House. And same thing. She told stories, she did songs. And I think I reckon I would have been maybe like 11 or 12 at the time. I was like a kid. And I just remember being like, oh my God, like, so many of my favorite bands are rock bands. They come on stage, you spend months so excited for them to come out to Australia, and then they get on stage, they play the songs, and that's amazing, but it sounds like the CD, and then they go home and you're like, that was fine. I guess I liked that. And so that's really important to me, is for it to be an experience. So I really appreciate that that's landing for you.
Yeah, well, it's what you were saying about the tour guide. So I'm very fond of saying the very first storytelling was oral, and if those people didn't do a good job, they didn't get dinner. And I think that's the same thing. It's like you were saying, you couldn't pay your rent. It's a very difficult thing to pull off, particularly when you're in the moment. And when you said, or maybe it's arrogance that you think that you'll always be able to pull it off if something goes wrong. It's not at all arrogance. I think it's actually existing in creative flow and knowing that you are doing that, so that you're like, well, this is always moving, and if something slips there, that I can actually just pull us back in and we're going to head there. And it's really about that courage to leap without a net, I think, is part of it.
Totally.
And it is a courageous act, because obviously the net is a lot more comforting to have.
I think being in creative flow is exactly. You're right on the money. You know what? Obviously, but for anyone watching this who doesn't know, I came and saw Sophie do a talk about her most recent book that's just come out at a library nearby. Well, she came through Brisbane, and I was so inspired by the talk that you gave. And there was so much of what you said as a creative person about the process of writing and where your ideas come from, that I was like, yes, yes, these are things that I always say all the time as well. And it was so amazing to hear them, to hear somebody, especially who's as eloquent as you are and as beautifully spoken, be like, this is just that idea also of, you were saying with a lot of characters or a lot of story development, that you just feel like you don't know where it's coming from. It's not really coming from you. You just sit down and there it is on the page. And I think that's all that same thing, right? In my family, I mean, we always talk about us being like in the flow, just like, in the flow of, it's where the ideas come in. It's where, just the movement of creativity.
Yeah.
And I think the medium of doing that on stage for me occupies the same space.
But I've also learned over the years of doing it, because my awareness of it comes from not so much long-time yoga practice, but long-time yoga teaching, because that's the same experience energetically as what you were saying with the tour guide, and also being on stage, is that you shifting and changing and things can go wrong and you just sort of go with the flow. But it is actually quite difficult to not let impediments drop into the path. And I think that's also part of the work of it. And so it's sort of like constantly tending to that flowing path, so that you're not just dropping in these little obstacles, because it is easier to have that obstacle there and go, oh, well, now I can't do that. So, I'm just going to stop. Yeah. So there's a lot of work that goes into it. And the reason why I mention it in the context of your performance is it's a lot harder than it looks, because you're in flow. It looks like it's this flowing thing and you're having a great time, because you are having a great time, but it's very difficult to create and sustain and keep doing it for years, because so many things come up in life that not just impediments you're putting in the path, but are just impediments in the path. Like you were very unwell a few years ago and still have the consequences of that. That could have been enough to just say, this is too difficult. I'm not going to persist with this.
Yeah, I think absolutely. What's interesting, that and losing your hearing in one ear, like profound hearing loss in one ear as a musician is brutal. It actually wasn't even on the table. It's interesting that I've thought about it since, and I think probably for a lot of people it would have been the knock to be like, I just like, I had an EP get shelved that I worked on for all this time, and then I finally get out here. I'm managing to do this stuff. I'm finally able to put things out in the world. I'm taking control of my, all of my creative work. And then this happens. Like, I think it probably could have been really easy to be like, enough, but it actually really didn't even factor in for me. And I think probably for that same reason, that state of creative flow and movement. And I think also, I feel like that was a very profound thing that I said before, that like each tour you do and each show you do is really like, in that style anyway, is really like pulling in bits of everything from everything that's happening around you, the weather that day, or the energy in the space, or the people that are there, or just all these little tiny things, and weaving them together on the fly into something cohesive and enveloping for the people who are in the space. And it is hard work. Energetically, I think it's really hard work. You're having a great time, and then you get off stage and like, just like grabbing everything you possibly find to eat, like breathing really heavily, But I think actually that was also probably part of the reason that it didn't occur to me that I should stop when my hearing went. And not all the way, but when my hearing partially went, then it just sort of felt like, well, this is part of the tapestry that I'm weaving today. This is just another one of the threads that, didn't even occur to me that it might be a showstopper, Yeah.
And for those who are listening and not watching, that sound you heard was Lisa knocking on wood.
Yeah.
I think what you described then about your process is actually about making yourself the cauldron. And you are kind of just pulling on all those elements and you're stirring them around. And when you're on stage, there is physical movement. Like you have this rhythmic movement because you're also playing at the same time. And I find it fascinating that you just never lose where you are while you're playing that guitar and telling the
Thank
story. And I'm like, how is this possible? But it is that I think it's trusting that magic is real. I know your family background probably lends towards that.
you.
Again, not getting in its way and not thinking that it's silly, but also believing that there are things that we can't see and don't understand, which can feed into live performance because live performance is that important to us as humans. And it is a form of magic.
I completely agree. There's I think there's life that's created, even if only temporarily, or cognizance, maybe not necessarily life, but something that's created in those, those moments where you're performing and you're giving stuff to the audience is giving stuff back. And there's an energy about that every single time that is its own unique little thing that exists in that space. I think you're completely right. There's definitely magic in that. And magic, I think, also in, whatever's going on, that space that, you can pluck things from out of the air, that sometimes they just fall into your head or sometimes you can pull them out. I think also that space is a lot of also where you occupy. If you're also sort of occupying that same space, or maybe having things just pumped directly into you from the cosmos or whatever. It all sounds very woo-woo, but that's how it feels a lot of the time,
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I used to think of it as woo-woo, but now I think it's actually just ancient. I think that if we were not living in places where there's a lot of electric light and impediments to us connecting with nature and all sorts of things, we would probably just be doing this quite naturally from childhood. But everything gets thrown into the path, right? So we think, oh, that's an activity for these funny people who like they meditate and they chant and that sort of thing. When actually it's like, no, this is intrinsic to who we are as humans. You've just been getting in the way of it.
I completely agree. Yeah. Oh, full stop on that. Yeah, I completely agree. Yeah.
So I'm not actually going to talk about any of the stories you perform live because people need to go and see it. Because anything I could attempt to say would also be like a pale imitation. But suffice to say, there are some terrific stories and they lead into the songs. But then you just said earlier that you don't necessarily know what you're writing about until it's done. So it's not as if you think, oh, I have this great story and now I'm going to write this song. It's like the song happens and then it's almost like you have to go and find the story to marry to it, if that makes sense.
It's you know what it is? I think the song comes first, and especially some of the stories are really weird, right? Like
Great.
Yeah, I've definitely made some choices in my life. And normally the kind of choices that would terrify other people, normally the things that other people run screaming from, I'm like, wow, that sounds like it could be a cool time. It's, but I think what it is that I don't know what I'm writing about. A lot of the time I don't even realize that there's something that I'm digesting, that I'm like chewing over, mulling over in my mind. It's just that like a song arrives, and I actually don't write all the time. I write just if there's a song coming. Maybe I'll make like a voice note on my phone if I think of like something occurs to me, or I wake up from something while I've been asleep and I'm like, oh, that's good, write that down, or but mostly it's just that the song gets written, and then when I look at it afterwards in its entirety, I'm like, oh, that's what that's about. And then the struggle is having to be bold enough, and I want to say vulnerable and also confident enough to tell the story that accompanies it, to make the entire thing more than just the song when you see it live. And that's the tricky thing, I think. Sorry, I just kicked a lamp. I just kicked the table and the lamp fell over a little bit. Sorry. Well,
right,
nothing I can
mood
do.
lighting now.
That was very comedic, wasn't it? It's like very slapstick moment. Here we go. I knocked over, this is what I did. I knocked over a lamp, and then in knocking over the lamp and trying to fix it, I knocked over a candlestick, which was brass, and then rolled off somewhere on the wooden floors. I'm so sorry. That was very unprofessional.
Don't apologize. There is nothing to apologize for. This is an interview. We're having a conversation. This is why I don't actually edit them unless something really major happens, like a short power outage, because that's all part of it.
Go for it. I feel like for me as a person, that's actually like sometimes you do something like, that was a great summary of who I am as a person. I'm like trying to give like a serious answer, and then I actually just kicked the table leg and knocked several things off the table. But basically, oh my God, where was I? Oh,
Talking about stories, and you mentioned, there was something you said that I think was really worth drawing out, which was having the vulnerability and the confidence to talk about the story behind the song, and those things they belong together, right? Because in order to be vulnerable, you do have to be confident in who you are, because you have to be able to say, "Take me or leave me. I'm about to reveal some things to you."
yes. And that, I actually think that in a lot of ways, on like say an energetic level, I think in a lot of ways that was why things weren't working for me earlier, on a career level, because I was not prepared to do it. I felt like, especially there's, one of those stories in particular that I think we probably shouldn't even say on record, shouldn't even say on video, but one of them especially that is a bit litigious, right? Like, and I felt really nervous about talking about any of that, beforehand, because you think like, oh my gosh, this is, you sort of tend to internalize it a little bit. It's a weird story. It's a weird set of circumstances to have become embroiled in, even indirectly. And it took a really long time. I also am the kind of person, I think, that because, I'm quite like outgoing, and I tend to wear my heart on my sleeve with everything. If anyone's gonna like talk about their feelings and burst into tears, it's always me, like but it was really hard to talk about times that you feel like you've failed, or yeah, like that's the big one actually for me, I think, was like times that you feel like you failed at something, and failed at something in, a romantic sense. Like, I can't make my relationships work, which is how I felt at one point in my life. I can't make a relationship work, or I made a bunch of weird decisions and now I've ended up in this wacky life pit that I just can't get out of, and I think it's really hard to start being honest about that stuff. There's something much more vulnerable about, if you're prepared to dissect why things happened, which parts were your fault, how you feel about it now. Like, it requires I think a lot of honesty with yourself, but a lot of self-confidence also, to be like, here's all of it.
Yeah.
Like, just spread it all out, and you just like make of that what you will.
Yeah.
I think it's a really hard thing, and I wasn't prepared to do that as a songwriter or as a storyteller for quite a while. It's hard.
Yeah, it's hard because it's also the self-confidence to say to yourself, I'm actually worth examining all of this so that it doesn't happen again, because I deserve something that's better than this. But in
Totally.
order to get to that point, yes, I do have to have the confidence to look boldly at everything and say, all right, I stuffed up there. That was okay. Let's try again, because I know that I'm working towards something that I deserve.
Yes, totally. Well put. Well said. Yeah.
I'm-
That was very succinct. Beautifully said.
I like to try to come up, the occasional succinct thing.
Oh, I love it. You should edit books or something. So who knows?
But I am interested in whether you would think of yourself as a storyteller first, or a songwriter first, or a performer first.
I actually think I actually think that wow, that like stumped me. The order that I thought those were going to spring to mind, it was not was not what I got. Um I think I thought that the answer was going to be as a songwriter first, but I actually think it's as a performer first. I think it's not where I thought that was going to go. But I actually think that all of this for me starts with that as the seed, right? Like, what is really important to me is more important, I think, even than telling a story, or, say writing a song, or, writing anything. The most important thing for me is that this sounds very earnest, but is that people leave my orbit feeling good. That's the most important thing for me. So that applies to everything. And all of the jobs that I've had I've always had weird jobs. Like, so I was a tour guide for years. I was a bra fitter for years after I left tour guiding. I became a professional bra fitter. Um, I, and that job for me was about having the opportunity to talk to different people in different walks of life, and just scrape off all of the surface level stuff right away. Let's talk about how you feel about yourselves, what we're conditioned to believe as women, noting the same things that I'd hear, the same negative talk that every single person would hear and come in. You think, where are we internalizing that? And being the connecting dot, for each of these individual people that can be like, do you know what? I've heard that 10 times today. It's not specific to you. It's actually not even a reflection on you. This is, be kinder to yourself, basically. Like, let's make you leave here and feel amazing. And that has been the core driving factor for every career and personal choice I've made, is that's the thing that's important to me, is maybe some amount of being in service of, on an emotional level, I think. And so I think I think performer as my number one is actually the truest answer. Yeah.
I don't think it sounds earnest because I am exactly the same way. So there you go.
I know, you're like I just love everything about you, and it's probably because I'm like looking at myself and being like, what a cool gal,
Well, look right back at you. But to bring it back to Wildwood, there we're going to pull that in. Is where I think the performance element comes in there as well, is that your instinct about it having to be a barn dance song rather than something that might be slower and sadder, because that's you thinking ahead to the experience your audience is going to have when you play it live.
True. I think that's definitely true. There's also something in, I love a sad song. A lot of the time I gravitate towards sad songs. I'm not a sad person, but it's just a lot of the time it's my preference. But that's not necessarily what I want to create for people when they come to see me. And I want to have, I love having those like really pulled back, intense moments, but it's for the overall energy is that I want people to be enjoying. I mean, it's that same thing again, isn't it? It's the overall thing is that I want people to be enjoying themselves. Like, I don't necessarily want you to come and have like a big like soul search and cry in the bathroom. I want you to come and be like, oh, it's not just me, and leave with a spring in your step, So that's actually a very good point, I think, about the direction that we went for the production.
And on the subject of sad songs and not being a sad person, I actually tend to, my pet theory is that if you are listening to sad songs, that actually helps you to process any sad emotions you have. So that means that you don't have to live that way.
I think that's, absolutely true. I noticed that my definitive like vibe when I'm writing things is a bit like sassy, like gonna like go and kick the door down. And I feel like, I guess that's probably the way I live my life as well. But if you were listening to like a playlist that I've made, it's all like sad cowboy songs, or, I was in love with a girl when I was 17, she left me and I got stood up, like a lot of sad punk songs. That's definitely what I lean towards. Yeah.
Well, Wildwood is definitely not a sad punk song. Lisa, I could keep talking to you for hours, but I think I should probably wrap it up, It's because also apparently you have an album coming in the not too distant future, so we can talk again about that.
Yes, I can't wait. There'll be another single coming before the year is out. And then the album is on track for early 2025. So yeah,
fantastic.
It's on its way.
We'll book in another chat then. For the time being, Lisa De Angelis, what a divine pleasure it has been to speak to you. Thanks for your time.
Thanks so much, Sophie. Likewise.